So let's talk about rate for a minute because, you've heard me talk about this a million times. How rate doesn't matter. Everybody makes a big deal about rate. Clearly, it doesn't seem to affect you a bit because it's not slowing you down. You're speeding up, not slowing down. Tell me why rate's not a big deal to you because I know it's not. We've talked about this before. Tell me why. Tell me how you're moving through this rate market and it's not affecting you one bit in your mindset.
Yeah, and I'll say this, when I started, all it was about was rate. So it was even, I think, a
Yep.
bigger transition for me. When I started, the rates were 3%, 2%. So
Right.
every time someone called me, the first question was, "Is the rate 2%?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Oh, this is great. This is amazing." Or I'm calling refinances and the rates are good. So for me, when I started, it was about rate. When I started my business, that's all it was. Well, then when you go from 2% to 6%, you can't talk about rate and get a deal.
Right.
So it was a big adaptation, adapt or die. And that's what it was. And it was, so what I started learning, what I figured out just by talking to people and talking to people, they don't care what their rate is. Once I figured this out, it was easy. They just care what their payment is. I
Right.
mean, that's what they're asking you. What's the rate, or what's this, or how much can I afford? They don't care if you tell them it's 300,000 or 200,000. It doesn't matter. It's how much payment can you afford a month. So I just broke it down really simply. Every time, one of the first questions I ask when I take an application, no matter what they tell me, they'll tell me, "Well, we want a $300,000 house." Okay, where do you want your payments to be? Oh, we want, if the rate's not below 7%, we're just not going to buy. Say, okay, well, what can you pay per month? I don't even answer the question that they're asking. I need to know, what are you willing to pay per month?
That's right.
And you know what they do? They answer.
They do. You have to have a housing
They
piece.
answer.
Yeah.
But, right. Yeah. Well, okay, we want to pay 1,800 a month. Okay, so you're going to be at $220,000. Can you find a house at 220? Yeah, we saw one. Oh, okay. Well, let's finish the application. We'll get you. We'll see if we can get you pre-approved for that. Um, I had someone last week say, if the rate's over 7%, we're not going to buy right now. I said, well, what are you guys paying in rent? They pay 2,000. I said, well, how much could you pay on a mortgage? And they said 2,500 is what they'll pay. And I said, okay, well, I think it was like $300,000 house. Your payment's going to be less than 2,500 with their down payment they're putting down. They're like, oh, really? I was like, yeah. So do you still want to do it? And they said, yeah. They forgot about the rate. So I mean, it's simplified. There's always going to be rate shoppers. There's always going to be people that say, I don't care what you tell me. But 98%, I would say 98% of people, if you just steer the conversation to how much can you pay per month, you've fixed it. You fixed the issue of rate, because that's really the issue. I've had that conversation with someone when they said, "Well, the rate's 7%. I can't do it." I said, "Well, if the rate was 2%, but the payment was 5,000, would you make the payment?" They said, "No." I said,
Love that.
"Okay."
I love
so
that.
that was the big shift for me. 21 to 22. Getting into straight LO, going from it being easier than anything to say, "Oh, your rate's 3% or your rate's 2%," and they said, "Okay, great." I regurgitated that hundreds of times. And then I started realizing when I said your rate's 4%, 4.5%, 5%, 5.5%, 6%,
They're not so
I
happy
started
anymore.
realizing that didn't work. Yeah, no, that
No.
didn't work. And that's what's so funny too. I tell people this, that ask me, what about the rates? And I said, people were mad when the rates were 3.5. They were mad when they were 4. They were mad when they were 5. They're 7 now. They would go back. The people that told it when they did ask what the rate was and told us we were crazy, they would love for those rates now. People are never going to be happy with rates, so you can't sell on rate, or no one's ever going to be happy with you. I remember people telling me when I told them 2.5 that they heard that they could get 2.3.
That's
I mean,
right.
that's just human nature. That's just human nature. So you can't worry about the rate. You got to figure out, like I said, everyone's got a problem. You have to be the solution to the problem. The problem isn't the rate. The problem is, what can they afford and what can their family afford, so they can have the house they want, but also be able to pay for that house, and have a life. And if you can just connect those dots, you're going to get a lot of business.